Hello and welcome to Deeper, the podcast where we have honest conversations with fascinating people who've lived amazing lives and the companion piece to our YouTube series Deep. We want to give you a deeper window into the lives and experiences of our guests, and if you enjoy this video, please do consider subscribing because there'll be a new one every week. I'm Ben, and today I'm joined by Lewis. Lewis, ever since I saw your documentary on Netflix, I've been really excited to have this conversation. So thank you so much for your time and for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
I'm really looking forward to the conversation. And I guess for anyone who isn't aware of who you are and hasn't seen your documentary, could you just give us an introduction to who you are and what you're known for?
So this one's going to be a little bit difficult to summarize, but yeah, the documentary is called The Psychopath Life Coach. And the reason for that was when I was 18, I was diagnosed with an antisocial personality disorder. Originally at the time, I thought that was just a label that someone had put on me because I was doing bad things in my life. But what later later transpired through my life was these sort of personality traits persisted even past the point of the negative behavior that I was displaying in my life. And the antisocial personality disorder is the clinical term that's given to a psychopath. Yeah, I mean, I've had lots of trauma. My dad was an alcoholic. He put me down a lot, called me a buffoon, told me never amount to anything. I was sexually abused. I tried to commit suicide once. I was a drug addict, alcoholic, and not just, like most teenagers do, but to the point where it was 4 days without eating or sleeping. And I was just, in a really bad way, having my teeth knocked out, jaw broken, slashing the back with a knife, fighting every day of the week. Got addicted to violence at some point throughout this whole journey because I just had this need for significance that came from that void that was left from my dad. Not feeling loved by my dad and wanted by my dad, I just went out looking to fill that void and filled it in any way I could. All these external substances to fix that internal problem, and it was drink, drugs, gambling, fighting, anything that could kind of make me feel, but I didn't feel, and that was part of the problem. And yeah, I'm sure we'll get onto it, but as the years progressed, I managed to, I got myself into more and more problem to the point where I was in and out of prison, but I turned it around and I became a life coach. But controversially, there's a lot of people that still believe this label exists within me, and I'm still on the fence as to whether or not it actually is or it isn't. There's the question of, was I ever a psychopath? Have I used it to channel it into more productive areas? Do we all display these traits? And maybe I do in a more present, more authentic way. Or not authentic, but I guess, do I allow them to be seen more than others, hiding them away? Or am I just still this cunning, manipulative psychopath who's doing anything for his own personal gain? I've been called a cult leader. I've been called, a manipulator. But the truth of the matter is, regardless of any of these labels and all these either positive or negative things, there's a lot of good that's come out of it, and I've been able to change, a ripple effect of millions of people's lives. So I think that was hopefully a bit of a summary of quite a crazy journey.
Let's go back to the very start then, which is the first thing you talked about. You mentioned your childhood and your father. So let's start there. So what was childhood like for you?
So I'll be honest, it wasn't as bad as I know that a lot of people have had it. It wasn't like I was getting beaten up every day. It wasn't like I was having cigarette butts put out on me and, all that sort of stuff. And I don't think I mentioned it earlier, but there was sexual abuse as well, but that didn't come from my family, thank God. But my dad it just didn't like me. I don't know if he also had this antisocial personality disorder, but for some reason he didn't like me. And he would just call me names and just look at me in disgust. And it would just make me feel awful. And there were times where it did become physical. It would make me feel bad about myself to the point where I would hurt myself. So I remember when I was 10 years, much younger actually, 6, 7 years old, looking at myself in the mirror and punching myself in the head as hard as I could after these arguments with my dad, because I was just so angry at myself because I thought that I was the problem. And unfortunately, my mum was, although she wasn't necessarily abusive, she was very emotionally disconnected because she didn't grow up in an emotional household. So there was never any I love yous or hugs or how are yous, and there was no emotion in my household expressed other than anger. That was the only emotion that I ever experienced. So that was the only one that I ever learned. So I would just have rage only and no support from anybody else, unfortunately. And I think that progressed later on in life as well, it manifested in many ways, but not in positive ways, unfortunately.
And was there any extended network? Were there aunties or uncles or grandparents, or no siblings, of course, but cousins or anything like that?
No, I've got a very small family. I think there's about 10 of us in total across my whole family. My dad disconnected from his entire family. I even asked him what he thought family was once, and he said, family are just people. So he had a
Wow.
very, very interesting perspective of life.
So do you remember a time, what we're talking about now, I guess, is formative years as a child and them being very difficult. So I guess as we get into this, we can talk about it further, but do you think that these formative years are what shaped you, or do you think that you were the person you were and they added layers on top of that?
Well, this is the age-old question, isn't it? Nature versus nurture. And Dr. Jeff Beatty in my documentary on Netflix says that it's always a bit of both. There sometimes can be a genetic component, but it doesn't necessarily reach fruition on its own, and it needs these environmental factors in order for it to come out. But each individual scenario is different. So if I'd have been brought up in a loving and emotionally intelligent family where I was able to explore and nurture and release my emotions in a safe way, then maybe my path would have been very different. But it may not have been as well, because the genetic component also may have reached fruition in another capacity. So it's very difficult to say exactly where it came from, but I think it's probably a compounding effect of both the person I am and also the environment that I was in.
You mentioned a moment ago sexual abuse at a fairly young age. Do you mind if I ask about that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, I'm completely open about this. The interesting thing is, because I've shared this story quite a few times and I really am very emotionally detached from it, I'm trying to find ways to become more emotionally attached, because I want to be able to experience these things and feel them. But it's part of this condition, or this safety box mechanism that I put myself into, where I'm in complete shutdown to the point where I don't feel anything for these things that have happened. I never have. So it's difficult to actually bring up the emotion that I wish was there. But it works perfectly for interviews, because I can share it as if it's talking about the weather. One of these needs and quests for significance was acting, singing, and dancing. I didn't understand this at the time, but I now know that it came from a place of craving love and not understanding that, and looking for it in significance instead. And one of the things I discovered or thought of was, maybe I could become famous, maybe I could be on stage. And I got into acting, singing, and dancing. I didn't particularly like any of them. I enjoyed them, but there wasn't one that particularly stood out. I just wanted to be in front of the camera. I wanted to be on the stage, and I just wanted to be seen and heard. And during one of the stage schools I was in, one of the older guys invited me back to his house, and I didn't think anything of it. I didn't realize the age gap really much at the time. I knew he was older, but he was like called kind of older and cooler kind of thing.
What was the age gap?
At the time, I must have thought it was only like maybe 3 or 4 years, because I was 11. I must have maybe thought he was maybe 14, 15. But on reflection, who knows? Maybe he could have been a lot older. Maybe he could have been up to 18. But I don't really know. I never really know if this guy was someone who was actually at that drama school because he enjoyed it, whether he was a predator, whether he was experimenting. Like, it's really difficult to say. But all I know is he invited me around his house, and that night he climbed on top of me and I froze, and it turned into a sexual abuse, which I didn't understand at all at the time, and buried it for 15 years until I got into treatment, and it kind of got unearthed, and just another part of my story, which I didn't really realize had an impact on me, and still don't now. Like, I couldn't say sexual abuse has had an impact on my life, because I can't see how it has. I can't say, oh, I always react in this way in relationships because of the way I felt in that trauma. There's no direct correlation. I just know that it's likely that it's had a significant impact on me in some way. But I have never felt or feel any way about that, to be honest. But just know that it's such a significant thing that it must have molded me in some way throughout my journey.
It's really interesting how you're discussing this, because we've talked to a lot of people who've suffered from sexual abuse, and yours is, the way you're describing it is the way that someone would describe the fact that they've just had their bathroom done or something like that. It's like, it's an event that happened, but it does seem like there's a complete detachment. Do you feel that about all emotion, or more about things that other people would see as traumatic emotion? Do you feel disconnect from happiness or sadness?
I really don't feel any emotion at all. I don't feel any happiness or joy or fulfillment. The only things I really get are stimulation, more sensation based stimulatory things that give you adrenaline. So that's why I used to use drugs, because it makes you, you feel something. So I used to like to have lots of sex when I was younger because, well, I still do, but at the time, because, you can feel that. That's why I like to work and become successful, because I can feel the level of power and stimulation, and my mind is being, stimulated. So those are the things that I can feel, and I can associate certain emotions to more brain levels of understanding. So, for example, for me, love doesn't feel like love. I don't have this warm, fuzzy connection that people explain, and I have an understanding of being significant to somebody, and they have to show me that. I can't feel it. So yeah, on a day to day, I feel near enough nothing. I'm almost flat most of the time, which is why I have to ensure that I'm doing a lot with my life to make it, feel significant enough. Otherwise, I would probably slip into feeling probably even, I don't know. I don't even get depression or sadness either. Really, it's just a flatness, which can be quite uncomfortable.
It's interesting because to look at you, you're very well presented, and you speak well, and you've been successful in your life. And I was thinking, like, what is the drive to achieve, and where does ambition come from if you don't feel that? But is it, you sort of said a moment ago that in love, people have to show you they love you. Is it to do with that? Is it that if you're successful and people appreciate that, that gives you some sort of stimulation?
Well, the thing is, I want to feel, I want to love, I want to be loved. Like, I've craved that my whole life, and I've kind of battled whether or not I'm able to feel and receive and give. I know I can give it, but I can give it in ways that I know that people receive it, but am I fully opening myself up to radiate that in a way that a normal person would? It's definitely different now. And I just don't know whether it's down to this severe emotional shutdown due to this trauma that I've experienced, or if it's due to my genetic makeup or this condition. But yeah, sorry, repeat the question again.
No, I mean, that was actually a really good answer to it. It was basically about, where does a drive to be ambitious and be well presented come from if you don't feel? And I was wondering if it's about other people being impressed by you.
Well, ultimately, I want to be loved, and the closest thing I can find to that is these more stimulatory, significance, egotistical, kind of being seen version of that. A normal person would just have this warm, fuzzy, content feeling, knowing that they have this love around them to the point where they don't feel the need to have to, go out and put themselves in front of a camera. But for me, unfortunately, I don't get that. But I do get a buzz and a stimulation and a kind of validation from these things, which kind of fills that void enough for me to feel complete, because there's like a void there. And that void is sort of temporarily filled through this work that I do, whilst continuing to go on that quest to actually uncover these raw emotions. I'm constantly trying new things. I've just come back from Bali for another 4 months. These are from temples where I've been praying with, Indonesian priests, trying to do all sorts of, you wouldn't believe the things I've tried to try and open up my heart, from breath work to plant ceremonies to water purification to, and also the traditional therapies, coaching, counseling, psychotherapy. I'd love to be able to experience a full range of emotion. I'm even happy to experience the pain and the darkness, the fear, although I don't like a lot of those, because I see them as huge restraints that have been massively beneficial for me to not have, because the huge advantage of this emotional shutdown is I don't really fear. I don't worry about risks. I don't really care about other people's opinions. I don't have any self-doubt or lack of confidence or these emotional burdens that paralyze people from doing the things they want to do. I've also, because, when someone's blind, they can hear better, or if they can't hear, they can see better. And because I don't have, many sensations in my body, it enables me to think very clearly. So I can have a strategy and I can lay it out in my brain and I can physically see it in steps, almost just looks like a step 1 to 10. And it's the exact steps I need to take to get where I need to be. And usually, even if you're able to create that steps 1 to 10 in your brain, which I don't think many people can, there would be so many emotional blocks over every single step that's like, you can't do that, or what about that person, or this is scary. And it just stops them from ever taking those steps. With me, I can just go, what's step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it's been quite beneficial. And it's been a program that's played out and it's shown me that I can become successful with this part of myself. But the further I climb, the more successful I become, the more significant I get, the more followers I get, the more money I get, all the things that I thought may be the answer to what I was looking for. I realized that I still feel relatively flat, and it doesn't really make me feel any happier or any more fulfilled. So I do need to do this, continue to do this inner work in the hope that I can summers up these emotions, because I know that they're not completely gone. They're not zero. If there's a flicker, there's an almost like there must be something there. I know I love that person. I just can't feel it. Or if something severe happens, like it sounds quite morbid, but if there's a death or something, I'd feel that. So I know that I've had feelings and they're there. Day to day, they're not. I don't get influenced by other people's. It's very shallow. I would say it depends on sort of where I'm at in life, but it could be about 5% of what I think a normal person's is.
I want to jump back a little bit now and just go back to your childhood. So where we got to is this moment of abuse, and then where did your behavioral issues start? Like, what was the point where people started looking at you thinking, okay, something's a bit off with the behavior?
Yeah. Well, interestingly, who knows what happened pre-memory. But I was always a naughty child, which comes back to this nature and nurture. So even from, my mum said I was just a naughty kid, just from a young age, even in nursery. She told me once where it was a day where she would come in and view the kids whilst they were in their nursery, and all the kids were sitting around on the carpet, and there was me in a Superman costume running around banging a drum singing happy birthday, which kind of puts it into context, that sort of attention that I was craving. But that could have also been because I wasn't getting it at home even from that young age. So I don't have the memories from back then to really understand where it came from. But I know that there wasn't this sort of adolescence or teenage switch where I kind of went down the wrong path. I've kind of always been a bit different, always been an attention seeker, always been a troublemaker, always been naughty. I've never understood the hierarchy of authority, which is interesting. So I would never listen to anybody. Mum and dad couldn't tell me what to do. School couldn't tell me what to do. I was almost expelled from primary school, which is
From primary school?
Yeah, which is almost impossible to do, I think. Secondary school, I did get expelled from, and that was for refusing to accept the authority of staff. And it was because I genuinely, and still to this day actually, can't quite grasp. And I think it's, if I was to have this condition, which I'd love to talk about my perspective over whether or not I think I have this condition or not at some point, but if I do have this condition, this antisocial personality disorder, it has many traits to it, not just the ones that people would think about, which is just this emotionless, violent person, But one of them is a grandiose sense of self, where you believe that you're better than other people. Now, that can be seen in obviously a negative way, but it also can be seen in quite an empowering way, where you don't see yourself as better than people, but you can see yourself as equal as other people at least, and not less than other people. I think a lot of people just have this belief that there are all of these people that tell them what to do, and they must follow what they say. And I just never understood that concept. So police, lawyers, politicians, teachers, parents, they're just people to me. I don't understand the concept of how they could tell me what to do or how to live my life, which is why I went down the wrong path and ended up, breaking the rules and getting in trouble for it.
So could you understand the sense of consequence though?
No.
So like, for example, say police you mentioned there, I can see what you're saying about saying they're not better than me, they're just a person in a uniform, but they have a power to make something negative happen to you if you don't do what they want. Is that removed as well?
Yeah, so another thing that apparently, you know, either I have or part of this condition has is, you don't really have much understanding of consequences, and you also don't learn from punishment. So it keeps on repeating itself. Like 80% of the prison population have personality disorders, and 90% reoffend. So it doesn't work. But I guess as I started to transform my life, I still had this, you know, I'm not like this conspiracy theory guy who kind of thinks, oh, you know, there are a lot I do actually believe in, but I'm not someone that jumps down the rabbit hole every day of the week. But I still don't live my life in accordance to the conventional way of living. You know, I don't believe there is a set way of living. You know, I don't think that you need to get a job and get a mortgage and get married and live in one country and pay your taxes and get your pension and die. You know, I'm very much, how can I live my life to the fullest? What countries can I live in? How can I be most free? How can I I don't do things my way. You know, I don't care about what anyone else is doing or what they tell me I should be doing. So I guess I'm doing the same things now, but I'm doing it in a way that's not going to get me in trouble anymore.
Okay, well, that sounds positive. But we're talking about getting in trouble. So you started off with, you know, let's say behavioural issues as a child. Where would that have transitioned into a period that was antisocial or something that would have been, you would have come to the attention of the law?
Yeah. Well, from the age of, I think it was 13, my first one was I got arrested for shoplifting makeup because I was showing off in front of a group of girls and stole some makeup.
For them or for you?
For them.
Right.
Yeah, they were like, get me this, get me that. And I was just stuffing it in my pocket, didn't care. And then criminal damage was my thing. Like I love criminal damage. I love to smash things. I love to smash windows. I smashed one window that would cost £850 and one window that was £650, huge windows. But then I used to just get a throw out of the smash. So I would steal the bus stop, the bus hammer that was the back of the bus for emergencies. And I would just have this little bus hammer with a diamond tip and I would just go around smashing every window I could find. And I don't know if that was a cry for attention or just like an impulse, recklessness, or some sort of thrill or stimulation or desire to feel or adrenaline. But whatever it was, I got a lot of criminal damage convictions racked up. And by 14, I had an ASBO. So I had an antisocial behavior order, which is obviously directly linked to antisocial.
Sure.
And I was banned from certain areas and couldn't be around a certain amount of people.
At 14, you say?
At 14, yeah.
So it's quite young.
Yeah.
And how were your parents responding to that?
They kind of given up a bit at this point. They decided to ring fence me from the family because I was getting my brother into trouble.
What is your brother like? You know, what was the relationship like as children and how similar are you or different?
At the time, he was quite similar because I think he kind of looked up to me because he's 5 years younger. So he looked up to me as his cool older brother, I should imagine, at the time. And I was getting into trouble because I started selling drugs and then I started getting him selling drugs with me, for me. And then I think that my drug deterioration became less of a cool older brother and more of a druggy older brother. And I think he kind of rightly took a different path, and he is very different to me. So he's definitely not like me. He's like the opposite of me, actually.
So your parents were worried that you were getting him into trouble.
Yeah, which they were right.
They were right. And so you say they ring fenced you from the family. Like, how did that manifest? What did they do?
They literally wrote me a letter and they said, you're affecting the family and you're also affecting our marriage and your brother. So you're now cut off from the family and you're not going to have dinner anymore. And you just come up and go to your room and
wow.
And then that's it now.
And how old were you then?
16.
So
probably.
Did that have an impact on you emotionally?
I didn't think it did, but then a year later, I always say found, and I don't know why I use that word. It's such a psychopath word to use, but I found a girlfriend.
I didn't expect you to say girlfriend at the end of that sentence.
Just found this girlfriend. No, I met a girlfriend, and she was like my first love, and I did love her. So this is why I know that I'm not a full psychopath. And I'd love to talk about psychopathy because there's a spectrum that people don't understand. Breaking it down first of all to the antisocial personality disorder, there's many different characteristics on there, and one of them is just the the emotional spectrum. And you can be on this spectrum and have this disorder in various, degrees of severity. You've got everything from an empath, which is somebody who feels emotions too much to the point where they're consumed by them on a day-to-day basis, and they can't even hear somebody else's story without breaking down and crying and it being in their dreams and not being able to think about it for days and days on end just because it happened on Emmerdale or Coronation Street or something, and they're riddled by it and they're paralyzed by it and they have probably pretty miserable lives. So, that's not something I wouldn't wish on anybody. Then you've got people that have a perfect emotionally intelligent equilibrium where they can express their emotions in a very balanced color palette point of view, from the negative to the positive, and release them and cry and let them pass and move on without them lingering or bottling them up, storing them up, and all that sort of thing. Then you've got the people that kind of bottle up emotions or don't display them or don't have them, and that goes right to the end of not having them at all. And the people that don't have them at all are more likely to fall into the possibility of becoming violent because they have the ability to do that and not care about that. And also that, coupled with trauma and coupled with maybe a thrill to kill and all that sort of thing, would create these psychopaths that end up murdering people. But you can also have psychopaths that become valid members of society, that play an important part of society. Like we actually need psychopaths in order to exist as a society. 33% of CEOs are psychopaths. And that's because they need to make decisions quickly. And if they had emotions cloud in their judgment all the time, it would be very difficult. And they're looking at the greater good. Same with politicians and war. Sometimes you've got to make a calculation. I've got to make a decision between A and B. People are going to die regardless, but how many less people are going to die if I make this choice? But if you was stuck in the middle saying, but what about all these people that are going to die? You wouldn't make a decision at all. So sorry, if you remind me of the question, I just...
No, you actually went down a really interesting direction anyway. Like where we started was you were talking about the fact that you found a girlfriend.
Gotcha. So I found my girlfriend, and I did love her, and I felt this love, and it kind of confirmed maybe I'm not this bad and unlovable kid, because this is kind of the beliefs that I had. I was bad and unlovable. Why didn't my dad love me? If he didn't love me, then maybe no one does. Also, I couldn't feel that love. Maybe it was being given to me by my mum, but I just didn't feel it. So to me, I just wasn't being loved. I didn't understand maybe that I couldn't receive it at that point. Why didn't people love me? And then everything that I was trying to do wasn't working. So I was going out and I was doing the acting, but then I got sexually abused. And then I went and, tried to find it in crime, but then that wasn't working. I was getting in trouble, and all my quests for significance and love seemed to sort of come to a dead end. And then I found, I got this girlfriend. No, it's not the right word. I met a lovely woman who ended up being my girlfriend. And we was in a relationship for a year, and I ended up spending quite a lot of time around her family's house. And they actually were a family unit where they'd sit down in front of the television and they would, laugh and joke and banter with each other, and they cooked me dinner, and they had a big family. They had like 3 sisters and a brother. And I just thought, wow, this is what a family's like. And I started to think, maybe I am not bad and unlovable. And it really did fill that void that I'd been looking to fill that my whole life. I felt loved almost. No, that's actually not almost. I think I would say I felt loved at that point. And then my alcohol addiction was getting worse at this point though. So I was taking a bit of weed and drinking a bit before that. But my mum and dad my dad was an alcoholic. My mum drank a lot, probably alcoholic at times. But my dad was the main alcoholic. But alcohol was just very frequent in my family. So I drank from quite a young age, from like 16. But at 17, I was starting to get drunk and drinking like whiskey. And one particular night, I drank a load of whiskey and had an argument with my girlfriend. And she very, very bitterly wanted to hurt me. So she said, well, you know what? I cheated on you. And I actually think, out of all the traumas, considering I've had, there's other traumas I haven't mentioned. Like I walked in and found my dad dead of a sexual, the other ones I've mentioned, like sexual abuse and stuff like that. But when I think back at that one, that's and actually other ones in my future, like I lost a baby and all sorts of things. But for some reason, this one sticks out to me as being the one that I remember feeling the most, and actually probably like the nail in the coffin. I think that I was starting to suppress my emotions from a younger age, and then there was this moment where I kind of opened myself up and allowed it. And then the moment she told me that, I just felt loss and rejection and confirmation. And I kind of, you hear when people die and everything flashes before their eyes. That happened to me, but it was all my traumas all into one. And I'd felt my family rejecting me and ring fencing me and cutting me off. I didn't feel it at the time, but I felt it then. And I felt all this confirmation of, wow, Lewis, this is the information that you now need to listen to, that you are actually bad and unlovable. And I completely saw red. Like, when people say they see red, I didn't actually see red, but that expression I know for a fact is what happened to me. I blacked out. I went on a frenzy, didn't know what I was doing, started smashing a kitchen up in rage, fits of crying rage, sort of didn't know what I was doing, and pulled out a kitchen drawer. And as I ripped it out of the socket of the drawer, it fell to the floor, and a 6-inch kitchen knife and it fell to the floor. And before I even knew it, I picked it up and just went, and then didn't even realize what I'd done. And then walked downstairs, and my girlfriend's friend was there at the time. She's like, Lewis, what have you done? And my neck was actually splurting with blood because I'd slit my throat. And you might not be able to see it now because it's 17, 18 years ago, but there's and I've got tattoos and stuff, but there are 2 scars there. And I'd slit my throat because it was that painful. I don't know if I wanted to kill myself. I don't know if it was impulse. I don't know if I was just seeing red. I don't know if I'd gone psychotic. I don't know if I was even trying to hurt her in a way by sort of saying, well, let me show you what I can, punish you for doing that by, putting this on your shoulders. I have no idea why I did that. But I went, a bit insane to the point where they had to, the paramedics arrive, and I started fighting the paramedics. And then eventually they pinned me down, stitched me up, put me in hospital, but then I ran away. Went back up to her house, knocked on the door with blood everywhere in a hospital gown. And but when she opened the door, I actually realized I had nothing to say. So I just stood there and said nothing. So she was obviously freaked out, called the police, and I got sectioned under the Mental Health Act and put in a padded room.
I mean, that was an amazing sequence to listen to, up to the point you got sectioned. And I just want to jump in because I want to say, the bit where you went back to her house in the gown and knocked on the door and she opened it and you just stood and stared at her. Do you remember your thought process at the time? I
was just so heartbroken. She literally shattered my heart, and I think that's been a lot of the problem ever since. And I just didn't know how to fix it or what to do, but just loved her. I remember like screaming and crying, saying, let me die, when they were trying to stitch me up and things like that, and just being just so heartbroken because I knew that I'd lost her when she'd done that. When someone does that, you're not, it's never going to be the same.
And she had done it. It wasn't just something she was saying to upset you.
I don't know. I should imagine she did. Yeah. I never really found out, but I should imagine she did. Okay. I think we even tried to get back together after, actually, for a little bit. But then she ended up getting a restraining order against me. So.
Okay, so well, let's go through that. So you went to you got sectioned under the Mental Health Act. I mean, it sounds like from your description at that point, when you look back on it, something had snapped, because you talk about blacking out and going kind of psychotic.
Yeah.
So at that point, when you were sectioned, did you accept that it needed to be happened, or were you resisting and trying to free yourself?
Well, I only got sectioned for the night. And what was really interesting was they put me in a padded room, as cliche as that is, and just let me sleep and sober up. And then they woke up in the morning. I woke up in the morning and they just came in and they said, are you all right now? And I said, yeah, I'm fine. And they said, okay, have you got a contact number for someone to pick you up? And my mum just literally picked me up, didn't say a word, and just drove me back home, which is just bizarre. In hindsight, you'd think that there was some serious intervention that needed to happen then. But I think they just put it down to just this drunk teenager who just had an argument with his first girlfriend, and first love troubles again, and just sent me on my way. And it was never spoken about at home. It was never spoken about to my friends. Mum and Dad didn't say a word. And
So no one talked to you about it?
No.
So what was so after that, you'd essentially, you tried to get back together, but you'd lost your first girlfriend. So what was the progression then in terms of your behaviour? Because at that point, as you've described, you were kind of drinking heavily and potentially alcoholic, and you were smoking some weed. But what was the progression into antisocial behaviour after that? Because I know that you mentioned earlier about getting in fights and things like that.
At this point, when my dad used to hit me, I used to freeze. And I used to remember thinking, like, I could actually never hit you back because I love you. Because I love my dad as well. So that's another thing. I do have emotions. It's just that I feel like they're different, and they're just harder to access now. But they are there. Like, I can tell. I know when I love somebody. I just can't tell you what it feels like. But anyway, I love my dad. I remember thinking. That's the key word, not feeling. But I remember thinking, I love my dad. I could never hit my dad. But he was hitting me, so that kind of showed me that he didn't love me. But I would always freeze, and I would always be very cocky. I'd always be. I don't know if I was on like a self-destruct or almost self-harm, but I'd put myself in situations where I would get hurt, especially later on in life. Like, if I tell you the stories, you wouldn't even believe them. Like, people, when I tell them on podcasts, people always tell me I'm lying, and it makes me laugh because I just think, okay, it's actually real. But I mean, I used to get a fight with the mafia and stuff over in Cyprus and all sorts of like putting myself in the line of getting killed because I just didn't care at all, swinging from balconies and just all sorts of crazy, stupid things. But anyway.
But to fight somebody, do you have to feel hatred or anger towards them? Or was it more that you just like the adrenaline boost it gave you?
Well, no, so just going back to what I was... but before all these craziness, what I used to do is I used to get myself in situations where I would just get jumped, and I used to actually not fight back. I'm not sure if I was scared or just unfamiliar or was in that freeze moment, because when my dad hit me, I would freeze. When I was being sexually abused, I froze. So up until literally 17 years old, I actually used to get jumped like quite regularly. And they used to just get me on the floor and start kicking me. And I used to just wait till they finish and then just get back up and laugh it off. And I didn't care at all. And I don't know if I wouldn't say I enjoyed it, but no, I probably did a little bit. There's a part of me that did. I don't know why. And it was kind of there because I didn't have that bravado. I wasn't I was tiny, I was skinny. I was tall, but I was skinny. So I wasn't like the big hard man. So instead, I was just the crazy one that could take it and didn't care. And that was kind of my niche almost, as it were.
Sure.
But around this time of kind of self-destruct with the girlfriend, and it's a bit of a mix mash, but I got involved with more alcohol and cocaine and stuff like that. And I went to a young offenders institution for stealing a van. And over the next few years, my life went crazy. But there was this one time where I was in a nightclub, and I remember this guy that had jumped me not so long before with a group of his friends. And it was kind of like where I picked the knife up and slit my throat, where I just saw him, and I just saw him, looked at him square in the eyes, and my fist just came up and just punched him in the face. And I promise you now, I had absolutely no intention of doing it whatsoever. It just involuntarily happened from somewhere. So something in my subconscious told me to punch, didn't even tell me, just punched this guy in the face. And it was the first punch I'd thrown. And then we got into a fight, and I won the fight. And then, well, I didn't exactly win, but like I didn't get beaten up for once. Just I came out on top. And then bouncers kicked me out, and I just felt like the most powerful man in the world. I felt great, and I was just like, this is it. I wanted to get this significance from my dad, from the girlfriend, from acting, all these things that didn't work, but I like this is good. And I got addicted to violence, and I just started fighting aggressively and frequently and looking for it, to the point where I was fighting almost more than once in a night sometimes. Like, I'd get kicked out of a nightclub, I'd have my shirt ripped off, and then I just didn't do this a lot of times, but there would be times sometimes where I would literally pay homeless people for their t-shirt so that I could put it back on, go to the back of the queue and get back in, and then jump back into the fight again. I was or I'd jump over the barbed wire and come out with like scratches all down my, just anything to get back involved with it, because I was just addicted and obsessed with it. It wasn't like, oh, I've had a fight now, well, I need to go home. It was just like, give me more. And yeah, obviously that racked up a lot of charges. I mean, ended up having a very chaotic life for a few years of drink, drugs, violence, with some very serious offences, GBHs, ABHs, affray.
And do you think, you mentioned earlier about the sort of spectrum of psychopathy?
Yeah.
And obviously the people that most people think of when they think of a psychopath, or, you know, what might be called a behavioural disorder or something, is people that kill people.
Yeah.
I think that's what most people think about. Do you think that kind of level of violence is on the spectrum, in terms of like, do you think there's people that could start like that and progress into that, or into murder, or do you see it as two separate things? Like, do you think what you were doing was the violence? You didn't want to damage people or hurt people, you just enjoyed the moment of it? Or is there a world where it could have gone down a different path and it could have progressed into hurting people for the sake of hurting them and seeing them be hurt?
It's an interesting question, because you can't predict how things will turn. You know, it's like the sliding door moment. You know, you turn left or you turn right, and you know your life is going to be entirely different. I can't really say how my life would have progressed, because I don't know how I just don't know. But there is a very possible, you know, in terms of the escalation of my violence, from going from a little teenager who didn't fight back to going to someone that would stamp on people's heads and, you know, put them in comas. There is no reason why that wouldn't have progressed into murder. I don't think I would ever be a serial killer. I never got a thrill or a thought how you know, amazing would it be to kill somebody. But it happening in a scenario, it's quite possible, really. Yeah, eventually, especially if my drugs progressed, you know, because coke turns to crack, and it doesn't take long before violence and crack turn you into killing somebody.
Oh, and you said a minute ago putting people in coma. Did you actually do that?
Yeah, twice actually.
You put people into comas. So let's get towards that, because I think, is that linked to your first prison sentence?
No, actually, first prison sentence was for stealing a van and crashing it and getting caught with some weed and stuff like that. But the GBH, I was alleged to hit someone with a bottle and bit them on their abdomen in a nightclub, and he was actually fine until he was in a taxi and then dropped down, and then he was had a brain hemorrhage, and then I actually went to prison for something else. Actually, I think I breached my probation, and then the day after I got released from prison, 5 a.m., the police came and arrested me for GBH. But for that one, I managed to stay on bail, and it was a 2-year trial, and I managed to keep myself out of trouble during that time. And I got a job, and I started a bouncy castle business, renting out a bouncy castle. And I'll be honest, I did all of that to manipulate the courts. Like, I knew that I needed to. I actually got a girlfriend, another girlfriend at the time as well. And I thought, if I got any chance of staying out of prison, I need to be squeaky clean during this trial. So I thought about all the things I could do in order to look like that, be perceived like that, and start to make some changes in my life. But behind the scenes, I was still taking drugs, and I was still selling drugs, and I was still fighting. I just was making sure not to do it, not to get caught, and things like that. And I ended up after that getting some of the charges dropped down, because actually I got done for GBH, but then I also had a fight with 4 guys, me and my friend and 4 guys, and actually we got charged with another 4 GBHs. So it sounds insane, but at one point I had 5 GBH in a fray. It's on my record, my police records. But they luckily got dropped down to ABH, and then 2 of them got dropped, so there was just 2 ABH. So I was down to 1 GBH and 2 ABH. And this was when I was looking at 8 years in prison, and this is when I went to my pre-sentence report with probation, and this is when they told me, you know, Lewis, you do realize you're going to prison. And I didn't care. And they said to me, do you not feel any empathy or any remorse? And I was like, no. And that's when they sent me for the psychiatric assessment, which is where I got the diagnosis of the antisocial personality disorder. But somehow, and I always just think it's very unfair, but just saying it how it is, I think it's because I used to always slick my hair to one side and put on a suit when I used to go to court and speak well. And I got away with a 2-year suspended sentence and a £3,200 fine and 6 months tag, and I couldn't be drunk in a public place for 18 months and probation. And it was like, and 250 hours community service. It was like the largest community order I could have got, but I didn't actually go to prison for that. But then I ended up doing it again and did go to prison.
So you went through that whole process to
Yeah.
avoid prison, and then how long was it afterwards that you did it again?
It was a fair few years, to be fair. I mean, I got lots of bits in between there, but nothing that sent me to prison. And at this point, I'd learned I can't go out to nightclubs because I'd get caught on cameras. So I started to become more of a pub man. I started to get on the drugs more at people's flats, and fights would be a little bit more behind the scenes, and I don't know, getting a little bit more strategic with my crimes, I guess. But
so how did you? What age were you when you first went to prison? First of all,
18.
18. Okay, God, 18. Oh, everything you've been talking about up to now sounds like about 40 years worth of life, and we've just got to 18. Okay, so you stole a van, and you got sent to prison. What was prison like for you? I mean, you've talked earlier about not really fearing things, but were you afraid or nervous about going to prison, or how did that whole process play out?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because there's an element of kind of nerves, but there's an element of excitement as well. And because I lived in my friends kind of respected that in a way. It was almost like a bit of a level up in what I was doing. So there was an element of anxious excitement that came with it. But it was a horrible place to be fair, like 18 to 21 young offenders institution, especially when they put me in Wood Hill, which is a double ACAT, which was secure prison, just because it happened to be local to where I was from at the time. And there was like murderers and gangland members and people on, and everyone wants to prove himself and everyone wants to show that they're harder than the next person. And it's just an environment of just fighting. So it was pretty chaotic, to be fair. But then when I came out, I just felt like you give me the worst punishment that society's got to offer, and it was all right. So yeah, it probably hindered me more than it helped me, because that fear of, oh, what about if I end up going to prison, which I didn't really have anyway, but I guess is the emotion that most people live by. I don't want to commit a crime, so I don't want to end up in prison. When you've experienced that and you're like, okay, well, that wasn't too bad. It actually, there's, it can never really get any worse than that.
And you ended up going to prison several more times, didn't you? How many times in total?
It was actually only 3 times that I went to prison.
So can we go through what that was for, each one?
Yeah, so the first one was for the van, and the second one was for breaching my probation, and the third one was when I was in a taxi queue, and I jumped at the front of a taxi queue. I don't know if I did it on purpose because I was arrogant and thought I could, or if I was so drunk that I didn't realize. And a guy started shouting and screaming in my face, and I still to this day don't know. Yeah, I try and remember what he looked like, but I actually don't know, because all I can see is my dad's face shouting and screaming in my face. So this didn't happen all the time. It's not like every person I would go out and fight with would be like me getting back at my dad, but obviously there was some subconscious anger there towards him. But in this exact scenario, this guy was actually 40 years old and I was 25 at this point. This is the last time I went to prison, 24. So he was actually like significantly older than me, felt significantly older to me at the time. Yeah, he just really triggered me, reminded me of my dad. And I punched him once, and he hit his head flat on the ground, face first. And I thought I killed him, because he just didn't move. His face was just planted in the ground. And the thud that I heard from the concrete, everyone turned around from the train station and just looked. And I looked up to the corner and saw the security camera and just thought, oh, okay, I'm going to jail. So I put my coat over his head, thinking he was dead, put my hands up and thought, this is going to be my best chances of getting a lighter sentence, and waited for the police to arrive. And then they put me in the back of the taxi, and they didn't taxi. It was my taxi to jail, but they put me back at the police car, and everyone rushed around him and tried to help him and stuff. And then they wouldn't tell me what happened. And I even asked my friend, he came up to the window and he said, you don't know if he's dead or not. And then even in the cells, they wouldn't tell me if he was dead. And then the next morning they told me that he was in a coma, and he also had a brain hemorrhage. So this was my second GBH, my second brain hemorrhage on my file. So of course I was sent straight to prison.
And what happened to him eventually? Do you know?
I know that 3 days after he was out of the coma, and I believe made a full recovery. I've tried to reach out through probation, restorative justice, and things like that. But he has no interest in speaking with me. But I hear that because he's actually local in the area, somebody that I know knows of him. I believe he's fine, although I don't know what's happening to him mentally, if that's had any impact on him.
Do you ever think about that with guilt or feelings of remorse?
I really want to get to the point in my life now where I can say yes to that, but I also don't want to lie. And I want to try and I'm going to try and really think about it, because usually when you ask me that, like I get asked that question, my default was no, because I just think and I just tell my story and I'm not going there. But I've done a lot of work in myself in Bali recently, and I'm really trying to. So I'm going to really see if I can get there. No, I don't. No, it's still not there. I don't even know what that feels like. That's the thing. I don't know how to even get there. Even to try and summons it up, even to try and aggravate it a bit, to try and make it feel. I regret logically the impact that's had on him, and I know that that's not fair. And I feel sorry would obviously not make sense. I think sorry for him. Like I wish that had never happened to him, because nobody deserves that. But just having a feeling of whatever remorse feels like, I just don't have it. It sounds brutal, but it's just is what it is.
But I guess when you have a diagnosis for something, it's not a conscious choice not to feel it. So the negativity that might be associated with someone that isn't diagnosed saying, no, I don't care, feels different to somebody that has a diagnosis saying, I can't care.
Yeah, it's like someone that's depressed and they're saying, come on, feel happy. Come on, cheer yourself up. And they go, I would love to, but I'm just depressed. It's kind of like me. It's like I actually would like to feel pain. Give me some pain, like make me cry. You know, I want to release my trauma. I want to experience, like I said, that full color palette of emotion, the darkness and the light. And I'm happy to feel the guilt, the remorse, the depression, the anger, everything that comes with it, so that I can also experience the fulfillment, joy, satisfaction, content, peace. But it's just it's a difficult process, but I'm working on it. And I've had flickers where it's come up. Like I've done deep therapy sessions and like breathwork sessions where I've actually had breakthroughs where I've cried and I've felt. And I've done like plant medicine, like in the jungle in Bali, like a bufo, which is like smoking some the glands of a frog. It's crazy. It's supposed to like open you up to the universe, and it's just. And I felt the most deepest, darkest pain. All I felt was just dread. It was horrible. It was. You're not supposed to have that, actually. It's not you're not supposed to, but everyone has different experiences. Sometimes you can feel this divine light of the universe, but sometimes they actually refer to mine as an exorcism. They had to pin me down, and I was literally convulsing, and I was just screaming and also wailing, and just. But I just felt dread and pain and sorrow, and so I felt this, and so through these psychedelic medicines. Through these medicines, I've been able to access them. So I know they're there. I know they exist. Just on a day-to-day basis, they're just very hard for me to access. And I just really don't know whether it's down to just some severe emotional shutdown or if it is this condition or a combination of the two.
When you talking of severe emotional shutdown, am I all right to ask, you mentioned earlier about finding your dad
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that passed away. How did that happen?
he was an alcoholic and he would drink a lot. Like for as long as I knew him, my whole life, he would drink half a bottle of vodka, 6 beers, half a bottle of wine, just a whole combination of drinks every single night. But he was functional, so he'd go to work and he had a rule where he wouldn't drink until it passed 7, and then after 7 he would just drink until he passed out in his chair. And because of that, he got pancreatic cancer, because that's one of the alcohols can be linked to pancreatic cancer. And he got a terminal diagnosis, and he got diagnosed. Well, they didn't actually tell him how long he had to live. He didn't want to know, but within 6 months he had died. And we didn't know when he was going to die. And one day he was he vomited a load of blood, and they took him to the hospital. And the next day we went to visit him, and I walked into the room. Well, I asked the nurse, said, like, what room is, my dad in? And they said, oh, he's just in the room on the right or whatever. So I walked into the room on the right, and the nurse, she hadn't forgot, but she obviously didn't realize that we hadn't been informed that he'd already died.
Oh.
So I just walked in and just see him yellow with his mouth open on the literally laying on the metal, tray.
Oh, God.
And actually, to be honest, then I did actually cry because it was a shock. So I did cry, but then I shut down again. And I just went out and got on the cocaine that night and just acted like it was. And then I've never felt anything ever since that moment. So that was another shutdown.
Did you manage to have any form of resolution with him before he, obviously when people have No.
And that's a shame as well, because I know we're talking a lot about the negative parts of my life, but hopefully we have a chance to get onto some of the more positive turnaround points. But he never got a chance to see the man that I am today. And I often wonder what he would say. And because I've got this negative view of him, unfortunately, I still sometimes think he'd have something to say about it, something negative to say about it. But yeah, no, we didn't have any form of resolution. You would hope that, as someone's dying, they would make, I'm sorry, I love you. But unfortunately, we didn't quite get that. So,
well, you mentioned the positive side of your life, and I'd like to move on to that. But to get there, can you tell us about, like, basically the lowest point you hit and where you decided to make a positive change?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't really have that low point because I was just in this oblivious kind of not fairy tale world, but my perception of reality was just different, to the point where I just didn't really even see what I was doing was necessarily that wrong. I remember sometimes where I would be in the police van on the way to prison, on the bus, like locked in these little cages, looking through the window, looking at people going to work, thinking, I'm glad I'm not you, and I'd believe that, thinking that I was in a better situation than them. Like, I was freer than them because at least I was doing what I wanted, and I just like the idea of extreme. Like, I hate the idea of normality scared me, like black and white, very black or white, but something in the middle was just something off about it for me. And those people walking to work, I didn't like. So anyway, I never really had that rock bottom moment. My whole life was kind of pretty rock bottom-y, but at the same time, I kind of thought it was normal. However, I did have a turnaround moment. So it was after I hit this guy in the taxi queue. I went to prison. I would have got 3 years, but I always got lighter sentences than anybody else because I managed to say the right things. And because I pleaded guilty at the scene, they gave me half off. They usually give you a third off for pleading guilty anyway, but because I pleaded guilty at the scene, they gave me half off, so I got 18 months. And I rang up my friends and rang up one of my friends and said, what are the people saying about me? And they said, you're on the front page of the newspaper, violent and boorish. Okay, cool. But then they said also your friend had posted a picture of you on social media. One was outside the courtroom the day you were sentenced, and one was outside the exact same courtroom 7 years before, outside the exact same courtroom, but 7 years gap, with the caption above it, nothing changes. And that, out of everything, that was kind of the thing that hit home, because I thought, first of all, I thought, how dare you say nothing changes? Because he was just as bad in his own way as me. I was a bit worse in other areas, but he was equally as, bad in life. And but he was right. I think that's the thing that hit home. Nothing had changed. Like 7 years had passed, and I was going to prison again, because this was the time between when I was 18 and when I was 25, going to jail. And as cliche as it sounds, I went back to my cell and I looked in a mirror, and I just, for some reason, I'd never realized that I was the problem. And realizing that nothing changed kind of made me look at myself. And I tried to make changes to things around me before. I'd tried to, get a job, or I'd tried to go to pubs rather than nightclubs, or make these different stupid changes, thinking it was going to make some difference. But I never looked at myself, or even had the idea of personal development, or I just believed you were a certain type of person, and that was who you were. Even my mum said to me, like, we all know you're not going to make old bones, Lewis. Like, she knew I was going to die young. I'd accepted I was going to die young. I was one of the worst of the worst. I was always the craziest one, and that was me. That was my identity. But then I kind of got this realization that I was the problem. I was causing this, because I'd also started to, I was blaming everything and everyone around me. And I was thinking about all these things and thinking, well, of course my life's going to be like this because of all these things that have happened. And, but I realized that if I wanted my life to change, I had to change myself. And just within these fractions of seconds, these things were happening, and I was thinking about these things, and I realized I was the problem, and I realized I was the solution. And just somewhere I just got it, I could change myself. And that's just so obvious. And so many people must come to that conclusion a lot earlier than me. But for some reason, it took me to the age of 25 to realize that I even had the possibility to change myself. And when I realized it, because I'm obsessive and compulsive, it's either part of these traits or just part of me, I've been very addicted to kind of anything that I get latched onto. I decided that I was going to change myself. And that's exactly what I did. And I've just taken one step in front of the next for the last 8 years, and it's taken me to some incredible places.
Because your Netflix documentary is called The Psychopath Life Coach. And obviously it's a brilliant title, because you initially think, well, if someone's a psychopath, they're not in a right place themselves mentally, so how could they help others? Obviously it's a bit of a sensationalist title, but how did you get to the position where you, as somebody that was, multiple offender, in prison a lot, an addict to drink and drugs, how did you get to the position where you were helping people improve their lives?
Well, so first of all, I changed my own life. So that was difficult at first. I started to do everything I could. So I rolled into maths and English. I did a rehab program inside prison that was 6 weeks long. And that was, just even identifying first level layer of emotions, how are you feeling? And everyone would just go around and say they're okay, or they're all right, or they're hungry. And you would start to dive a little bit deeper with a sheet and start to connect in. And it was just so basic, but I started to notice some changes with it. And then during one of these sessions, there was an opportunity. There was a guy from a rehab that came in and spoke about a rehab program that you could go to after prison. And I thought, do I finish my sentence and go back, or do I maybe apply for this rehab and, really try and kick the drugs and alcohol issue once and for all? Because although that I had these deep rooted issues, the alcohol and the drugs would fuel it and remove any inhibition, and that's when it would come out of me. So I went to this, I got a place at this 6-month rehab. They picked me up from prison gates, took me to the rehab, and the rehab was intense. It was 24-hour therapy, just breaking you down and rebuilding you, getting you to look at all the reasons why you needed to drink and take drugs. It wasn't just a case of abstinence. It was a case of becoming a person that is complete within themselves and doesn't need to use external substances to fix an internal problem. And it was hard. It broke me down. It did at times. I even felt suicidal at times through that process. But when I walked out that place, I just felt free, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. But then I continued drug and alcohol meetings every day, sometimes 3 a day, for months and months on end. I started volunteering. I went back to college, did an access course. resettled in Portsmouth down by the coast, which is where the rehab was. Different groups of people, all in recovery. Just really immersed myself in this. And whilst I was doing this, I was in one of the meetings once, and someone came up to me and they asked me for help, and I was thinking, why are you asking me for? Like, I'm also here because I have a problem. Yeah, so I'm not going to be much use to you. And he said, oh, but it's my first day. So I thought, fair enough, all right, okay. And I gave him a little bit of a breakdown of what happens. And then when he was walking away, I thought, actually, I've just helped that person. And it made me realize that you don't necessarily need to be too many steps in front of somebody in order to help them. Mm. So I was seeing these breakthroughs in these AA meetings and NA meetings and CA meetings, which are like Alcohol Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous. There's all sorts of different ones. I was addicted to them at one point because it was my new support system. So that was kind of all I had. So I was going to I went to 5 in a day sometimes.
Wow.
Yeah, I was pretty obsessed with them. They've got lots of them in Portsmouth because there's lots of recovery centres around there. So got more than usual. But I started to see all these breakthroughs from these people, and I realized that I was absorbing so much information as well. And I was thinking, in these meetings, I'm absorbing people's relapses, denials, breakthroughs, stories, triggers, traumas, and through that and my own personal experience, like I'm learning a lot. So I started thinking, why is this only available for people that are drug addicts and alcoholics? Like, this is actually helpful for normal people as well, because I'm seeing people going from rock bottom to better than average, and then there's these average people walking around not have the luxury of getting to the rock bottom to the point where they need to work on themselves to be able to get above average. And so I started helping people for free. I'd look on social media. I'd find people that looked miserable, writing their negative posts, and I'd literally say, hey, do you want to meet up in Costa Coffee, and I'll buy you a coffee and we'll talk about it. And that's how it all started, because I started to really help these people and get them great results. And I thought, wow, like, I'm good at this and I've learned a lot. That combined with sort of having the realization that this could be something I did some qualifications and doing some training. I started to get some clients. And not only that, but I was bringing a unique edge to it, because, not everybody had the type of experience I had. Not many people had the style I had. And also, due to this condition or emotional shutdown or my type of personality, or however you want to describe it, I was able to really push people to do the things that they want to do, and didn't let them get away with any of the BS that they'd come up with, or wouldn't get, sidetracked by any of their trauma that they would share with me, that would usually get people to retract back. Or, if they had to, I would challenge them on their way of thinking. They might bring up a significant story that would make people, freeze, because they were so consumed by how dramatic that story is. But for me, I wouldn't actually feel anything. So I would ask, I would say to them, how's that story serving you, and start challenging them on it, and how could you rewrite that story? And not many people were prepared to challenge people on such sensitive subjects, but sometimes they need it, and then still hold them accountable. Okay, so what is it you need to do, because most people have been like, okay, you just shared that thing with me. Just relax for this week. But I'm like, no. What we doing? Where are we going? And I'd get people results. And it was as simple as that. And if you get people results, you can build a business quite quickly. And then it moved into other coaches asking me how I was doing what I was doing. And then I created the actual training and the frameworks and the models to be able to teach the way that I coached other people, which also become very successful.
That's really interesting. And it's interesting when you talk about it, about how the diagnosis in some ways had sort of held you back a little bit in life so far, because you hadn't been able to fit in with society in the same way that people that didn't have that diagnosis might have been able to. In some ways, it allowed you to, I think I can exactly see what you're saying. You can cut through the emotion of the social contracts, where usually if people share something with you, you give them an easy time, or you say, oh, I'm really sorry to hear that. And then the next time you talk to them even, you kind of gently tiptoe around that. Whereas I guess what you were doing is pushing through the middle of that and saying, well, that doesn't matter at all. You're trying to achieve a goal. So forget about it. It's happened.
Well, maybe not so much in that way, but yeah, kind of. Yeah, I would obviously validate their emotions.
Sure, okay.
And I would, of course, allow them to experience and express that. But I would also, ask them, is that story serving them, and how else could they see this in a positive light? Something that Dr. John DeMartini ask people to do when they've experienced trauma, as he says, ask them to write out 100 reasons why they're grateful for that trauma.
Right.
And then you'll be very quickly how that negative thing that has been holding you back and the story you've been telling yourself about why you can't succeed becomes something you're actually pretty grateful for and happy that's happened because it's led you to where you are today. Allowing people to go to those places isn't comfortable for a lot of people. But yeah, I'm prepared to allow those sorts of conversations to happen and unfold.
And you've obviously been massively successful with it, and with part of that success, as we saw in the Netflix documentary, there's a group of people who sing high praise, and then there's some people who sort of say it borders on this cult thing. Where does that come from? Where do those kind of, I don't know, accusations or claims come from?
Yeah.
Can you see anything in them, or do you dismiss those?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them are disgruntled customers, and obviously they're just looking for something to moan about. And in any big organization or anything, anyone with a large following or anyone with any kind of anything large is going to have some polarity in it. There's going to be some supporters and there's going to be some haters, and some for their own agenda, and some because they don't understand it, and some because they're confused, and some because they got low intelligence or whatever. But there is some truth to the whole accusations of the cult thing, because we built a community, and there's quite a thin line between a community and a cult. And there are people with our logo tattooed on their body. We didn't ask them to; they have done that. And we introduce like community building, tribe building culture. In terms of we have a coaching master's stance. It's a power stance. It's to do with NLP. It's to put you in a peak state. And to there's this anyway. It's like mindset things. And we also have an ethos of no negativity. So if somebody is negative in the community, we remove them from the community. So it feels like we have these very rigid rules, and they're there for a reason, though, to protect our community. And it said it's and I come across like a godly figure, and it's my way or the highway. And yeah, it is, because it's my company, my community, and I'll run it how I want to run it. And I don't come in as a godly figure anyway. Like if you look at the website and our trainers, it's very much about the community. It's the Coaching Masters community, and I'm barely even on the website, and I'm barely even in the community anymore. I'm the CEO. So I think I can see, but I am the community leader. I'm the face of the brand. That runs the advertisements and delivers the training, and I've obviously got a presence. I was the one that created it. But we're not a cult. To be a cult, we talk about creating a culture. We have this environment with this ethos, where people that align with it are going to love it, and people that don't are going to be repelled by it. And that's exactly what we're looking to do. But to be an actual cult, there needs to be like brainwashing, for manipulation, for people to be in a disadvantage. But we're helping people develop their life. We're helping people create freedom. We're helping people help other people. And we've got some very, very happy customers.
Well, that's actually an interesting point when you said there about manipulation. Because I was wondering, do you have to, through all the things we've talked about, do you have to be careful with yourself that you don't, as someone that's potentially lacking more empathy, do you have to be careful that you don't manipulate people to achieve your goals, if you get what I'm saying? Or is that...
I mean, I wouldn't even I wouldn't even have to deny that I probably do manipulate a little bit. I mean, tell me the difference between manipulation and persuasion. I mean, actually try and give me a different, what's the difference? There isn't. As long as I think if I can manipulate somebody into believing themselves and believing anything's possible, and helping them get out their own way and go out and create a good life, then I'll manipulate them to do that. And if I can benefit along the way and we can both win, that's fine. Manipulation and persuasion, it's marketing. Marketing is essentially, it is quite manipulative. You are understanding pains and desires, wants, needs, triggers, pain points, objections. It's just psychology. And I'd be lying if I said that I didn't study and look into that, because it's a vital part of businesses, and every business does it. You've seen the Royal Navy adverts where they're like, come and join the Royal Navy and be a part of the future. But they don't talk to you about getting shot and getting killed and dying. It's all marketing and it's all manipulative. They're out for their own, in that scenario, their own personal gain. So yeah, I just think there's a thin line between all of these traits. I mean, you can look at egotistical and confidence. You could look at manipulation and persuasion. You could look at false charismatic charm, and you could look at just charismatic. You could. There's a thin line between these things, and I think as long as you got good intentions and everyone is benefiting from it. I think there is an element of manipulation in everything we do, because we're all out in life to get what we want. This is bullshit to even say that we're not. Like, everything everyone is doing is trying to get them a little bit closer to what they want in their life. So for me to act like I'm this complete selfless guy who's like, no, I'm doing everything for my community and I don't want anything back and I don't want to make any money and I don't want to live a great freedom-based life. It's just not true. So overall, I'm not sure if it's manipulation or persuasion. I think it's probably a bit of both, but I have full intention of benefiting myself and also the people around me.
And I guess I've got two more things to ask. My second final question is, throughout this conversation, I've felt like it's interesting because there's kind of a duality, because on one side, I feel like you're very, very comfortable with, the experiences you've been through and the diagnoses you've had and the, talking about all your processes you've been through in life. And on the other side, you've sort of said quite a few times about whether it's me or whether it's a diagnosis or whether it's emotional shutdown. And I'm just wondering, how do you feel? Like, if you today could go and see somebody and they would say, no, that was a misdiagnosis. Yeah. What you experienced was as a result of abuse, and you're actually a completely standard, normal emotional range person, and you can access that if you do this stuff.
Yeah.
Or if you could go and see someone, they'd go, no, you do have a differently wired brain. Which one would you prefer?
I would prefer the first one. Let me talk about this. So I battled my whole life with asking myself the question, do I have this disorder, and do I learn to live with this and just accept what I've got? Like, am I actually just going to be partially deaf, and just learn to just focus on my sight, which has its benefits because I can become very strategic and very successful quite quickly. And I still live a good life, but I won't be able to hear very well in that analogy. Or do I go, no, I can work on improving my hearing because that's possible. But then sometimes I get confirmation. Okay, let's remove the ear and eye analogy because it's going to get confusing now. But sometimes with my scenario, I get conflicted. I think I'm just not like normal people. I just really don't think I am. And it doesn't feel like it's in there. But then other times I'll get a little flicker, or people will just tell me, like, no, Lewis, like I can really feel energy from you. And I feel like you're this really loving person. And then I think, yeah, you're right. And then I'll try and do the work on it. But it's just it's either so deep that it's just like, I don't know how to open it. But if someone told me that this is how you open it, I would definitely take it. Yeah, and I've done that, and I've tried many things. It's just not an easy box to open. And it was only recently because I kind of accepted the label of psychopath for quite a while because I knew that I was definitely different. But it was only recently where I decided that actually I can't accept that because I can't live my life feeling flat. And the more success I got, the flatter I felt, because I was realizing that I was going after the things that I thought were going to make me feel better, but they weren't. And realizing that I was on this never-ending climb for the basic things in life that, are probably a lot more simple. And the only way I'm ever going to be able to allow myself to fully access that is by accepting that I have the ability to do it. If I keep on holding on to the label of I'm a psychopath, I cannot feel, then I won't, It's like before, if I was holding on to the label of I'm bad, I cannot change, then I never will. And I never did. But the moment I was like, actually, I accept responsibility for this and I can change, I did. So I've really tried to make the conscious effort in more recent months to be like, I'm not a psychopath. I possibly have this antisocial personality disorder, definitely display the symptoms of it. And on paper, I have it. However, that doesn't mean to say that I don't have those emotions. And with time, I doesn't mean I can't continue to, nurture them and evolve them. And I'm on a quest to do that. And I really hope that in years to come, I can redo podcasts and live these moments and feel these pains and cry and do all the things that normal people do and just get joy. Like I'd love to just walk down the road and just feel content, and just happy and, I just don't even have the happiness. Like the only thing I can get is like an excitement and a buzz from a coffee maybe, and a kind of like, oh, that's going to be cool when I do that next month, but yeah, I've lost track of what the question is, but overall, I think I display every characteristic of a psychopath. However, I don't think that needs to define me. And I believe I have the ability to change it. And I already have in a lot of scenarios, but there's just a lot of the fundamental, more deeper emotional ones that are going to be a little bit more difficult to change because they're so ingrained and maybe were never nurtured in the first place. So they're just dormant entirely. However, I'm on a lifelong quest and I'm still relatively young. So I'm sure as I evolve and continue to work on myself, more and more will be revealed. And my hope and my prayers are leaning towards having somebody with a full range of emotion, even the negative ones, although ideally not the fear and self-doubt and all the crippling anxiety and all the stuff that comes with it. But if I have to take that, I'll take it.